This subterranean passageway was dug from solid rock and was primarily used as a shelter in the event of war. However, it was that were used by military the reconstructed two-way railway for trolley cars used by the military and the civilian population on the island as they moved to and from their homes and offices. Our story begins on December 8, 1941. When World War II broke out in the Pacific with the bombing of American warships in Pearl Harbor. The Philippines was immediately invaded by Japan with simultaneous landings in the north and the south of Luzon. Corregidor, being an integral part of the total defense of the Philippines, the whole island was immediately placed on alert, suddenly subjected to tensions and threats of actual attack. However, the island had been prepared for. To all intents and purposes, Corregidor was ready. It was deemed advisable at this time that the President of the Philippine Commonwealth, Manuel Quezon, should be moved immediately from Manila to safety and security. The choice for this evacuation was Corregidor, known as the impregnable fortress in the Philippines. December 24, 1941. When bombs fell on the bay, the SS Mayon ferried the President and his party and family to Corregidor, where they arrived at nightfall.
First 10 minutes will be crowded. This is the crowded part.
General George Moore, commander of the fort, formally received the President in a lateral in Malintan Tunnel.
Mr. President, please accept our apologies for not being able to give you and your family more comfortable quarters.
We understand, General. We have to make the best of the situation, but think no more about it. You know, as a young man during the Phil-American War, I went through worse conditions fighting you Americans. So don't worry, General. I assure you, we will survive.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now for our billeting arrangement. You will occupy a lateral close to the hospital wards, Mr. President, together with High Commissioner Sayer and the male members of his staff. Mrs. Quezon and your daughters will occupy another lateral with the nurses, along with Mrs. Sayer and the other ladies. Including your son and the members of your cabinet, there will be 28 persons within the area. But I assure you...
Thank you, General. We will manage. Oh, and a Holy Christmas to you.
Same to you, sir.
It was Christmas Eve when President Quezon arrived at Corregidor. Mass was celebrated at midnight by the chaplain, Father Ortiz, using an improvised altar made up of boxes and crates and pieces of luggage. President Quezon recalls.
When we heard the words, Gloria in excelsis Deo in terra pax hominibus bone voluntatis, the heavenly song sung by angels almost 2,000 years ago, the word sounded painfully ironic. Glory to God on high and on earth, peace to men of good will. Peace. With bombs falling around us and on our beleaguered, unprotected boys in nearby Bataan. It was an awful night for me. The first of so many excruciating days and nights of pain, for I coughed all the time. From the beginning of the war, my malady was going from bad to worse. The lack of fresh air and humidity of the tunnel had an immediate effect upon my bronchioles. Although awake, I refused to think. I simply closed my mind tightly and allowed no thoughts to come in. The decision had been made, and I was determined to face its dire consequences.
Onward, please. This way. This way, please.
As death traveled blood, fumes, and powder, curling and Lysol.
Give way! I'm sorry, sir. You'll have to remain outside. My friend never need. I'm sorry. Please stay outside.
Hey, nurse, what about us? This man's badly wounded.
You'll have to wait.
Hell, this man's dying.
Please understand, we don't have enough doctors for all the wounded.
Might just everyone don't read the date.
When mercifully the all clear siren was sounded, Corregidor was enveloped in raging flames. There was now no denying their absolute resolve for absolute conquest. They had complete control of land, sea, and air operations, and still, no help was coming for the beleaguered in America. President Quezon, appraised of the decision in the United States to direct and concentrate America's full force of arms and aid to Europe instead of the Pacific, fulminated.
Punyeta! How can they write in anguish at the fate of a distant cousin in Europe while a daughter is being raped right here in the back home?
In response, President Roosevelt immediately wired President Quezon.
Although I cannot at this time state the day that help will arrive in the Philippines, I assure you that every vessel available is bearing to the Southeast Pacific the strength that will eventually crush the enemy and liberate your native land. Words are inadequate to convey to you my esteem and appreciation for the totally magnificent showing of faithfulness, heroism, and the spirit of sacrifice that the Philippine people, under your superb guidance, have shown. They are maintaining the most glorious standard of all free people.
President Quezon, reassessing realistic priorities of the global war, issued a reaffirmation of loyalty and trust in America when he wired Roosevelt.
The determination of the Filipino people to continue fighting side by side with the United States until victory is won has in no way been weakened by the temporary reverses suffered by our arms. We are convinced that our sacrifices will be crowned with victory in the end, and in that conviction shall continue to resist the enemy with all our might.
Braving the recurrence of an air raid in the afternoon of the next day, 30th of December, a small group gathered near the mouth of the east entrance of the Malinta Tunnel to witness the inauguration of the second term of Manuel Quezon as President and Sergio Osmeña as Vice President of the Philippine Commonwealth, with Justice Jose Abad Santos swearing them into office. In his speech, President Quezon said,
As we face the grim realities of war, let us rededicate ourselves to the great principle of freedom and democracy for which our forefathers fought and died. In taking my oath of office, I make the pledge for myself, my government, and my people to stand by America and fight with her until victory is won. I am resolved, whatever the consequences to myself, to faithfully fulfill this pledge.
on February 28, 1942, with his family and some members of the cabinet, President Quezon left Corregidor on the submarine Swordfish en route to the United States to secure help for the Philippines. He would fail, however, to see the final redemption of his beloved country, when on August 1st, 1944, President Quezon would die in Saranac Lake, deeply mourned by all the liberty-loving people of the world. In 1942, General Wainwright was summoned by General MacArthur to Corregidor from Bataan and told,
I want you to understand my position, Jonathan. I have to leave for Australia upon repeated orders from the President. I want you to make it known throughout all elements of your command that I'm leaving over my repeated protests. Goodbye, Jonathan. If you're still on Bataan when I get back, I'll make you a Lieutenant General.
And to the Filipino people, he said,
So long as the flag of the United States flies on Filipino soil as pledge of our duty to your people, it will be defended by our men to the death. Whatever happens to the present American garrison, we shall not relax our efforts until the forces which are now marshalling outside the Philippine Islands have returned to the Philippines and driven the last remnant of the invaders from your soil.
the brilliant propaganda duel against the Japanese, mustered by Major Carlos P. Romo, press aide to General MacArthur, with the voice of freedom broadcasting developments of the war, kept the fire and resolve alive in the hearts of soldiers in the field and civilians at home. Bataan was doomed. The soldiers, hungry and sick, did not know, or if they did not accept it. They had fought fiercely, passionately, for God, country, and home. But it would turn out this was not by Lieutenant Norman Race.
Good evening, everyone, everywhere. This is the voice of freedom, broadcasting from somewhere in the Philippines. Bataan has fallen. The Philippine-American troops on this war-ravaged and blood-stained peninsula have laid down their arms. With heads bloody but unbowed, they have yielded to the superior force and numbers of the enemy. The adversary, in the pride of his power and triumph, will credit our troops with nothing less than the courage and fortitude that his own troops have shown in battle. Our men have fought a brave and bitterly contested struggle. All the world will testify to the almost superhuman endurance with which they stood up until the last in the face of overwhelming odds. But the decision had to come. Men fighting under the banner of unshakable faith are made of something more than flesh, but they are not made of impervious steel. The flesh must yield at last. Endurance melts away, and the end of the battle must come. Bataan has fallen, but the spirit that made it stand, a beacon to all the liberty-loving peoples of the world, cannot fail.
That was April 9. Hemmed in on all sides by the enemy, cut off from all possible sources of help, its source of water gone with the surrender of Bataan, Corregidor was now completely isolated. Alone. Malita Tunnel was safe, but morale here was lower than elsewhere on the island. Dust flew and lights flickered. The crowded multitude inside East Lateral could hear the dull boom of exploding bombs above. Now the full concentration of Japanese fire began against Corregidor, supplemented by firing from behind the hills of newly occupied Bataan, where they could not be detected or pinpointed. On the 29th of April, the Japanese forces celebrating the Emperor's birthday further escalated their bombing, causing tremendous damage to all installations on the island. On May 2nd, the Japanese completely demolished Battery Geary with a directed penetrating center magazine. On May 3rd, General Wainwright wired MacArthur.
The situation in Corregidor is desperate. The enemy is ready to assault any time.
On the morning of the 5th, activity centered on the tail of the island, with particular concentration on the island's beach defenses. Japanese landing craft hit the beaches between infantry and cavalry points. taking stock of the whole situation. General Wainwright summoned Generals Moore and Beebe and told them,
The end must come tonight. It would be better to clear the situation now, in daylight.
Then he radioed his last message to General MacArthur and President Roosevelt.
I feel it is my duty to the nation and to my troops to end this useless slaughter. There is obviously no relief in sight. American and Filipino troops have engaged the enemy for nearly 5 months. We have done our full duty. We are sad but unashamed.
Approaching death. Life in Corregidor took on a faster, more intense tempo. There was a heightened feeling that life was now to be lived from day to day, without illusions of an ultimate victory, or heroic enshrinement, or even of just coming out of it alive.
All right, get back. Hey, come on, baby. Hey! Whoa, whoa!
Many felt the weight of their accumulated pay that bulged uselessly in their pockets as they rattled the dice or played endless bridge, rummy, and poker.
Pete's sake, stop there. You tried to do something.
I gotta think this over carefully.
Yeah, you gonna make me wait all day?
Jam sessions attracted crowds, which gathered in the dark, and they hummed softly, or tapped their feet to the nostalgic tune of low-moaning love songs. Sometimes, a nurse and her boyfriend of the evening would melt into a dance under the eyes of the partnerless onlookers.
Darling, at last I get to dance with you. Do you know, I never danced before. I mean, you're my first.
Okay, buddy. Have your first dance. It could be your last.
While others stole out into the perilous night, to lie on the harsh, dry grass that was softened by the dew, for a last clutch at life. One day, after a quick attempt to surrender all Corregidor and surrounding forts, in a brief interview with General Homan Bataan, Homer said,
I cannot waste time on your useless offer of surrender, General Wainwright. My terms are simple. I know you have been designated commander of all USAPI forces. I can only accept the unconditional surrender of all elements of the USAPI all over the Philippines.
Going back to Corregidor, General Wainwright, fully aware of the carnage that would surely ensue if he continued to fight the uneven battle, made up his mind and proceeded to the Japanese command post at Barrio San Jose and told Colonel South that he was ready to meet the demands of General Homan to unconditionally surrender all USAPI forces in the Philippines. With General Wainwright's broadcast to all Philippine American forces to lay down their arms, the formal struggle of organized military warfare in the Philippines ended. Thus, Corregidor closed a chapter of its turbulent history. But the epic 27-day defense of Corregidor will stand in world military history as a glorious achievement of human valor and the display of immeasurable bravery for all the victorious Japanese forces occupied the Philippines. They rebuilt the damaged defenses of Corregidor to prepare it against any future attempts to recapture her.
大佐、再武装の命令を遂行しなければならない。間もなくアメリカの攻撃を受けるのは目に見えているからだ。しかし、今手持ちの武器の量からすると、そんな攻撃など簡単に追い払うことができるのだが。
October 1944. Landings at Leyte, followed by those made in Mindoro and Lingayen-Long, marked the return of American troops to the Philippines. Soon, it would be Corregidor's turn to be recaptured. All manner of defense had been carefully laid by the Japanese, but the returning American forces, with the 119, began dropping troops and materiel on topsides parade ground and the nearby golf course. These were followed by the 462nd Parachute Field Artillery Battalions with their 75mm pack howitzers. 2 hours later, infantrymen of the 3rd Battalion, 34th Infantry Regiment, 24th Infantry Division, coming by sea from Marinelas, Bataan, landed at San Jose Bottomside for thorough mop-up operations. Displaying their fanatical ferocity and love of country, and full adherence to their concept of Bushido. On February 26, some 200 Japanese entrenched themselves inside the former Navy raid intercept tunnel at Monkey Point, waited until a company of American infantrymen was directly above the tunnel, then blew them up with the tunnel and themselves in one awesome, but for them, magnificent holocaust.
将校並びに兵士諸君、深い悲しみに駆られ、つうつうしかし大な誇りでもってアメリカ軍に対する我が軍の断、落とした戦いの近況をお知らせします。我が兵士はモンキーポイントのトンネルをもはや維持することができないと判断に到達しました。そこで降伏の厳しさと恥を忍ぶ代わりに最高の犠牲を払うこと、つまりアメリカ軍が最も激しい攻撃をかけて生きているトンネルを爆発し抑止することにしました。大国のために潔く命を捧げることにしたのです。帝国日本万歳！万歳！万歳！Stay where you are, don't move. Just stay where you are. Just stay where you are. ちょっと待ってください。
On March 2, 1945, at solemn ceremonies marking his return to the Rock, General Douglas MacArthur redeemed his promise to return. The island he had left more than 3 years before was now liberated from the enemy. General MacArthur would say,
I see the old Flagstaff still stands. Have your troops hoist the colors to its peak, and let no enemy ever haul them down.
On October 12, 1947, the American flag was lowered at topside Flagstaff for the last time, and the flag of the Republic of the Philippines hoisted in its stead. In their own respective times, the Filipino-American troops, then the Japanese imperial forces, made Corregidor a glorious symbol of valor, honor. Corregidor once more belongs